Hi, I'm Kristen Goodwin. On this episode of the Fox News Rundown, the debate rages on in Congress over what should be included in the next coronavirus relief bill. And Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says he supports another round of stimulus checks. But Kentucky Senator Rand Paul is speaking out against fellow Republican spending recommendations, raising concerns about a rising national debt. The lawmaker joins the rundown to discuss what pandemic relief he thinks is necessary. And the Trump administration's decision to send Homeland Security officers to Portland, Oregon, in response to violent protests is sparking criticism from local leaders who call it an abuse of power. Fox News senior judicial analyst Judge Andrew Napolitano weighs in on this, and coronavirus-related lawsuits regarding schools returning in the fall. Plus commentary from former assistant U.S. attorney and Fox News contributor Andy McCarthy. The Fox News Rundown is a daily news podcast where we take a deeper look at the stories important to you. You can subscribe on your favorite podcast player by going to foxnewspodcast.com.
I'm Charles Payne.
I'm Martha McCallum.
I'm Greg Jarrett, and this is the Fox News Rundown.
Wednesday, July 22nd, 2020. I'm Lisa Brady. Both sides in Washington now say more coronavirus relief is needed for the economy. But how much is enough? One Republican senator says his colleagues shouldn't lose their souls on spending.
I don't think that we should throw out good sense and believe in something the opposite of what we believe in because of this virus.
I'm Chris Foster. About federal troops in Portland, Oregon, and President Trump threatening deployments in more cities, Fox News senior judicial analyst Judge Andrew Napolitano says
the federal government cannot deploy any force other than on its own property, and certainly can't deploy forces for domestic law enforcement without the express request of the governor.
And I'm Andy McCarthy. I've got the final word on the Fox News Rundown.
A new pandemic prognosis from the president.
It will probably, unfortunately, get worse before it gets better. Something I don't like saying about things, but that's the way it is.
In his first White House coronavirus briefing since the spring, the president also making a direct appeal on masks, urging people to wear one when they can't socially distance.
Whether you like the mask or not, they have an impact, they'll have an effect, and we need everything we can get.
California on Tuesday becoming the second state to top 400,000 cases of the virus, second only to the former U.S. epicenter, New York. And as some states continue to set new single-day records and roll back reopenings, the White House and Congress are working on another relief bill.
We've spent an unprecedented amount of money. The good news is a lot of the $3 trillion we still have left to put in the economy and put back to work. We're focused on starting with another $1 trillion. We think that will make a big impact.
Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin said that during an Oval Office meeting Monday, then told reporters on Tuesday, we'll spend what we need to spend. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says $1 trillion won't be enough. The Democrat-led House already passed a $3 trillion relief package.
Well, I guess the question is it a good idea to borrow money to try to stimulate an economy?
Kentucky Senator Rand Paul says a caucus with fellow Republicans Tuesday sounded like it could be a meeting of Bernie bro progressives.
Republicans typically would have said no. That was more the philosophy of Bernie Sanders and the Democrats, to borrow money to try to stimulate the economy. There is no rainy day fund in Washington. There is no savings account. There's no money that you can give to people, and yet people keep promising, as politicians are wont to do, promising free money to people. This latest bill they're talking about is over $1 trillion, and that's before they start compromising with the Democrats to give the Democrats what they want. So I think it's a foolhardy notion to think that you can just create money out of thin air, give it to people, and that creates wealth. The reason we're struggling as a country is because the government has created a depression by shutting the economy down forcibly, the governors primarily. And the only way you get it back is not by giving people money, by actually opening the economy. It's the only way we'll survive and recover.
Some would argue these are very extenuating circumstances. I know there was a GOP caucus meeting Tuesday, though, and to say the very least, you came out of that meeting sounding pretty disappointed. You said, we're losing the country. What do you say to someone who might consider that to be an overreaction?
Well, we've added $4 trillion, $3 trillion to the debt for coronavirus, plus $1 trillion just in annual debt that we accumulate because we spend more than comes in. So we're at $4 trillion. We had another $1.5 trillion, $2 trillion. We're looking at about $5 trillion of additional debt in 1 year. You ask any Republican 6 months ago, wouldn't it be a good idea to add $5 trillion to the debt? No, every Republican in the land complained about President Obama, increasing the debt from 10 to 20 trillion over 8 years. Now they're willing to increase the debt over $5 trillion in 6 months. No, it's absurd. It's obscene. And if deficits were bad and a danger to the economy under President Obama, they're just as much of a danger. Just because we have a pandemic doesn't make deficits any less dangerous to the economy.
Is there a level of quote-unquote relief or spending that you would consider to be necessary at this point? I mean, you've mentioned opening up the economy is really what needs to happen to help, but how do you do that?
Well, the governors should be told that it's unconstitutional to forbid businesses from opening, and businesses should be allowed to open, and customers should be allowed to choose and make their own risks. This is a recession and a vast unemployment caused by government. So you have to know what the cause is. If the cause is government needs to reverse what it's doing. But simply printing money and borrowing it and giving it to people who still have jobs, I mean, it was a crazy notion from the beginning to send $1,200 to people who already had jobs. The reason they weren't spending money was not because they lacked money. It's because you closed the economy down and told them they couldn't go to stores. They couldn't go anywhere. And so really this is entirely created by the government, and the government needs to quit doing what they're doing, which is clamping down on the economy, and we'll survive just fine. But going into debt is something that Republicans used to be opposed to, and I think it's great hypocrisy that Republicans now have become basically the champions of Bernie Sanders' economic plan.
We did have the beginnings of an economic reopening, though, right, in many parts of the country, and now we're seeing a surge in cases of coronavirus in a good part of the country. So what about the concerns?
We've seen surges in coronaviruses in the midst of lockdown. New York had a lockdown and had 30,000 people die. New York had the worst death rate of any place in the world amidst a lockdown. So perhaps the lockdown didn't do any good, and perhaps the lockdown killed our economy but didn't do anything to stem the tide of the virus. So I see nothing to be admired in New York's lockdown. I see, a mountain of people who died, particularly in the nursing homes. But I don't think the lockdown did them any good. I think it killed the economy but didn't do any good for trying to contain the virus.
So to the states that are rolling back some reopenings and tightening restrictions now, what should they be doing to address health concerns instead? Is it all about masks?
I think that each individual needs to assess their own risks with regard to the virus. For those under 18, the risk of mortality is about 1 in a million or a little bit less. For those ages 18 to 45, it's about 10 out of 100,000 is the mortality rate. So really, we need to put it in context. Under age 45, this disease we're looking at is less dangerous than the seasonal flu. Above age 45, it's more dangerous than the seasonal flu. If you're in your 80s and you're in a nursing home, we need to do all kinds of things to try to protect you. But I don't think that involves shutting down the economy. I think that involves other precautions. We typically have among us tens of thousands of people who are on chemotherapy, but we don't tell the whole country to wear masks because you might give a virus to people who are on chemotherapy. What we do is people on chemotherapy try to be very cautious to stay away from children with infectious diseases or others who might transmit it, but we don't shut the entire economy down, even though there are tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people with depressed immune systems. So I think we've made a big mistake in the lockdown. We've crippled the economy, but I don't know that we've done much to the virus. I think the virus actually is going to get to the point of some level of immunity in the southern states before it abates, and I think that's what happened in New York. The interesting story that most people aren't reporting is that New York's doesn't have many deaths at this point and doesn't have many new cases. And people say, oh, that's because Governor Cuomo is such a great governor. No, it probably has nothing to do with him. I think it has to do with it. New York City in particular has now achieved a level of immunity that there is somewhat of a tamponading of the virus because of the level of immunity. Same's happening in Stockholm. Same's happening in probably northern Italy, where a huge number of people have gotten it, and the virus has run its course and probably won't come back in as significant a fashion as it did the first time.
Are we at a point with this virus, though, where people are so concerned that they may sound a little like the Treasury Secretary, that all bets are off, that whatever needs to be spent should be spent? I mean, is the public sentiment turning that way to the point where do you feel like arguing against more spending is kind of a losing argument politically?
I don't think that we should throw out good sense and believe in something the opposite of what we believe in because of this virus. So Republicans traditionally felt that debt could get to a point where it's a real burden on the economy. Many people worried about, our debt getting to be 100% of our GDP. We're now exceeding that. And there have been many who have said and argued that it will slow economic growth and ultimately that you can even destroy your currency. And so, yes, I think all of those are still valid worries, and I don't quit worry about them. I don't adopt the philosophy, this new monetary philosophy of the progressive Democrats because of a virus. If you are sincere in your beliefs that big government and debt are a problem, you should continue to have those beliefs. We shouldn't throw out our beliefs because of this pandemic. The other thing is that I think that many of the things we've done have not worked, and the people we're lauding are people who actually made catastrophic decisions. I think Governor Cuomo should be impeached, for what he did, for the disastrous decision he made to send patients with coronavirus back to nursing homes, and virtually half his people who died were in the nursing homes. Same with New Jersey. So terrible public health policy decisions were made, and I think in the end, none of these policies have probably been good for our economy or actually good in containing the virus.
A study released by New York's health department this month linked most nursing home deaths to infected staff, not the governor's order to accept COVID patients, though some healthcare workers and scientists dismiss the report as just an effort to shift blame. As for restrictions and lockdown policies, Governor Cuomo has hailed New York's efforts to slow the spread.
Our hospitalizations are at the lowest level since March 18th.
The former U.S. epicenter of the virus now averaging around 700 new cases per day, compared to thousands in surging states. But nationwide, the biggest number of deaths in one day since early June, over 1,000 in the Reuters tally for Tuesday. And many people are scared about both their health and their jobs. So could Republicans risk losing the Senate by not spending more on relief if that's what the voters say they want?
What if Republicans decide that they're going to be Democrats and they say, we'll offer you more money than the Democrats? Do you think that's going to encourage, the base of the Republican Party to want to vote for candidates? Frankly, I'd stay home if that's the choice between Democrats who will bankrupt you tomorrow and Republicans that will bankrupt you the day after tomorrow. So, frankly, no, I don't think that our base and our people want to spend more money. And I think, frankly, if you talk to people who have traditionally supported Republicans, they still are fiscal conservatives. They think the economy should open. They think this has been an overreaction, closing the economy down, and they think that our only route back to economic prosperity is to get rid of the draconian governor's rules that have impaired commerce.
Is this issue of spending, is it a missed opportunity for the president in your eyes? Because in the midst of all of this, Joe Biden has just released a third part of his economic recovery plan, and I think he's up to about a $3 trillion price tag so far.
The problem is that if both parties support vast amounts of borrowing, vast amounts of additional debt, there becomes less distinction between the parties, and it doesn't motivate people to vote one way or the other. So, no, I think Republicans shouldn't lose their soul over this, and I think many Republicans the ones that are in Washington are losing their souls. But I hear from Republicans at home who say, open the economy, let us get back to work, but don't just keep printing up money. Don't become like the Democrats simply because of this virus.
Kentucky Senator Rand Paul, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
This is Andy McCarthy with your Fox News commentary coming up.
President Trump says if mayors and governors can't stop violence in their own cities, he'll do it for them. So far, sending Federal Homeland Security officers to Portland, Oregon.
Portland was totally out of control. The Democrats, the liberal Democrats running the place, had no idea what they were doing. They were ripping down for 51 days, ripping down that city, destroying the city, looting it.
Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler says the federal officer's presence has escalated the situation and he wants them gone.
Before the federal troops got here, violence was way down, vandalism was way down. Our local and state law enforcement officials had contained the situation.
A group of mayors, including Portland's, has written to Attorney General William Barr asking for Justice Department and Homeland Security reviews of the officer's use. Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot says she'll go to court if necessary to stop it there. An administration source tells Fox News there are no plans to deploy in more cities, but the president says he's considering it if necessary.
If we just look at Portland as an example, it's unlawful and it's unconstitutional.
Fox News senior judicial analyst Judge Andrew Napolitano.
It's unlawful because federal law and the Constitution itself require that the federal government cannot deploy any force other than on its own property, and certainly can't deploy forces for domestic law enforcement without the express request of the governor of the state in which the forces are to be deployed or the legislature of the state, and neither is the case here.
Yeah,
it's also unconstitutional because these federal agents have been arresting people, or what purports to be an arrest. It's more likely, it's better characterized as a kidnapping. Because they are restraining people and locking them up without arrest warrants or without probable cause. Probable cause would mean that the officer doing the arrest actually saw a crime being committed. These people are being restrained for 2 hours and then let go. We know there's no probable cause because none of them has been charged with anything. This is just an effort to intimidate people from engaging in lawful dissent. Now, is there unlawful behavior going on? Of course there is. Is it destructive of property? Yes, it is. Is it within the authority of the Portland officials to restrain their police? Well, it's within their legal authority, but it's not within their moral authority because the job of the police is to protect lives and property. And if they don't do so, people will start using force to protect their own lives and property, and that's really going to ratchet things up.
Well, the acting DHS Secretary, Homeland Security Secretary Chad Wolf, says that, look, we have a mandate and a duty to protect federal assets like courthouses. However, as we've seen, there have been detentions. I guess, again, we can't call them arrests because I don't even think there's a record of them. Nowhere near federal property. People just walking down the street say they've been snatched up by by officers in unmarked rental cars.
Well, that's criminal. That's kidnapping. These officers could actually, I don't think this will happen because it'll be force against force in a public street, but these officers are exposing themselves to arrest by Portland police and Oregon state police. Can they fly to an airport and be deployed on federal property to keep people from destroying federal property? Absolutely. Can they travel from the airport to the federal property from wherever they're spending the evening, the federal property? Of course they can. Can they wander the streets and do whatever they want under the guise of enforcing local law? Absolutely not. That itself is a crime. So for Chad Wolf, and you quoted him very accurately, Chris, to say law and order, this is anything but lawful, and it's profoundly chaotic. It's not orderly at all.
So even if, let's say, New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio told the police, stand down. We don't care what anybody does. It's the purge. People can run around and do whatever they want. Federal officers still have no legal authority to come in and do anything about it.
Unless the New York State Legislature or the governor of New York asks them to come in. That's not me interpreting the law. That's crystal clear in Article 2 of the Constitution.
Moving on to this new coronavirus relief package they're working on, President Trump and Republicans in the Senate are insistent that this thing includes coronavirus liability protection for businesses. Now, you can sue for safety violations. Can Congress pass a law this narrow, saying you can't sue over this virus?
It's very difficult for Congress to do that because lawsuits over public accommodation safety or workplace safety are state lawsuits based on state law, and they're filed in state courts. So Congress would have to what's called co-opt the field. Congress would have to take away from the states the ability to regulate and to adjudicate issues involving coronavirus and put them all in federal court and then tell the federal courts to throw them out. Those are two enormous leaps which would generate huge constitutional challenges. It would be profoundly unjust for the Congress to bar you from bringing a lawsuit. You have every right. Where there's a wrong, there's a remedy. You have every right to commence a lawsuit, and you have to prove your case. You have to prove that it was the negligence of the owner or occupier of the land that you visited for a commercial purpose. For Congress to interfere with that is profoundly unjust and will cause many innocent people to go without redress. And is questionably unconstitutional because, as I said, these are state areas involving state regulations of local property.
I know you're saying that, well, you have to prove your case, but what about if there's just a deluge of cases of people getting sick?
Well, that's the price you pay for living in a free society, is that there's a deluge of lawsuits, Chris. You know, lawyers have a duty to investigate the lawsuit before they file it, and they can't at least ethically file a lawsuit that they can't prove. So if a person was in 5 public accommodations in one day and 5 days later got the virus, and there are damages, you know, it's not sniffles as the president calls it, but there are damages. You can't sue somebody because you got a cold. You can only sue somebody if they have caused you or arguably caused you a demonstrable, quantifiable loss. It is the duty of the lawyers bringing the case to prove the cause of the quantifiable loss. You can't just say, here's the 5 places I went to, now you 5 fight it out. You'll lose. The case will be dismissed, and you'll be charged with filing a frivolous complaint, and rightly so.
Let's talk about mask orders. They're in more than half the states now. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but more of them. Who's in charge of public health and safety? Is it the governors? Is it localities? Can a locality say, look, I want masks here, and a governor say no, as has happened in Georgia?
Well, under the Constitution, the states are in charge of health and safety. Different states have different state constitutions and state laws which delegate certain authorities to mayors. This dispute in Georgia is really unheard of, that the mayor wants to be stricter than the governor wants her to be, and he wants a judge to interfere with her decisions. The bottom line is, no one on the planet has the authority to compel you to wear a mask unless you're entering private property and they don't want to do business with you without a mask.
Even though cities and states can pass public health regulations, right? I mean, there can be a law saying you got to wash your hands if you work in a restaurant. What's the difference?
Because it depends on where you're ordering me to wear the mask and wash my hands. If you're requiring me to wash my hands before I touch your food, if you're requiring me to wear a mask before I touch your food, that is an ordinary and reasonable health regulation. If I don't like the regulation, I go get another job. But if you're going to require me to wear a mask in the streets, and I don't want you to think I'm a Luddite, I do wear a mask wherever I go because I think the Fauci is right. But if you're going to require me to wear a mask in the streets and I am not symptomatic, there's no legal basis for that whatsoever. That's like requiring me to wear a pink shirt instead of a blue one.
The Florida Teachers Union is suing to stop reopening of schools next month, saying they're not protected enough. Again, is this another thing where it's the eye of the beholder? Who decides what protections are adequate? They argue there's evidence that especially older kids can transmit as easily or more easily even than adults, and that this is a workplace safety issue.
They have, in my opinion, I'm sorry to say this because I want the schools to open, but they have a very strong case. The Florida Constitution expressly requires municipalities to maintain a safe environment in the school. New Jersey has the same language. This has produced many cases in New Jersey and in Florida requiring officials to bend over backwards to assure a safe and thorough education. For the governor to say, you don't have to wear a mask, just come to school, is not going to wash, and I'm sure the courts are going to get involved there. There may be politics. I mean, the teachers union hates the governor. He's a conservative Republican, and most labor unions don't like conservative Republican governors. I get that. But I do believe that under Florida law, they have a very strong case, and I think they're likely to prevail.
There's this Kentucky couple on house arrest because they tested positive for coronavirus. They refused to sign this check-in order saying, if we travel, we'll let you know, or we won't travel. Now they're on house arrest.
This is another profoundly unconstitutional procedure. First of all, there was no due process. There was no trial here. under the 5th and 14th Amendments, if the government wants life, liberty, or property, here, liberty, it has to afford you due process. Due process means the law was validly enacted by the legislature and it pre-existed whatever they said you did or didn't do. That's not the case here. This isn't a law. It's an executive order of the governor. Due process also means that only the legislature can craft a punishment. That's not the case here. The governor crafted it. Due process means there's a trial at which you're represented by lawyers. That's not what happened here. So, I mean, Kentucky has to follow the basic rudiments of federal law, no matter what its Constitution says, and I've just given you 3 reasons why they have not.
Well, and this couple saying, look, we didn't want to sign this agreement because we didn't want to get in trouble, say we had to travel for an emergency or whatever it was, and they didn't want to put themselves in what they saw as legal jeopardy. Now, there is no way, legally, as you're saying, constitutionally, and just temperamentally, there's no way a tracing program, we talk about testing and tracing being a way to contain this virus, it's just never going to happen here.
It's not going to happen in America because we have too much of freedom in our natures and in our cultures. It's just not going to happen. Look, there's only one thing the government can make you sign against your will. It's called an IRS return. Everything else you have the right to remain silent, which means you don't have to agree, you don't have to disagree.
Judge Andrew Napolitano, Fox News senior judicial analyst. Judge, thank you very much. Always good to talk to you.
Chris, thank you.
You too. Thanks, Judge. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
It's the Perino and Steyerwalt I'll Tell You What podcast. Dana Perino of The Five and Fox News political editor Chris Steyerwalt dissect the ins and outs of national politics. Subscribe and listen now by going to foxnewspodcasts.com. Rate and review the Fox News Rundown on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen.
It's time for your Fox News commentary.
Andy McCarthy.
What's on your mind?
He shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed. The Constitution says that's the president's job, but we're not hearing much about that from the chattering classes. We hear plenty of bloviating from the media Democrat complex, dutifully masquerading the rioting in Portland as mostly peaceful protest. And there is no shortage of faux outrage over President Trump's purported trampling on state sovereignty by dispatching federal agents to address the mayhem. But we don't hear much about the Constitution, including from politicians such as Rand Paul, who are wont to pose as constitutionalists. The provision quoted at the top of this op-ed is from Article 2, Section 3 of the Constitution. It imposes on the President of the United States the duty to execute federal law. The Constitution says the President shall perform this obligation. We're not talking about an option or something he may or may not do, depending on what he sees fit. It is a solemn duty. It is what being the chief executive is all about. The president has 2 principal, closely related responsibilities: to provide for national security and to see that the laws are enforced. The latter includes the protection of federal property and the execution of laws Congress has constitutionally enacted to address violent crime. Enforcing federal law is an independent obligation of the chief executive. Consequently, the president and the Justice Department never have to wait for a state to ask for federal intervention. Federal law enforcement agencies may and routinely do take investigative and enforcement action within state territory. They need not provide notice, much less ask for permission from the state or its police agencies. Federal officers in Portland are not a military force. They are deputized law enforcement agents of the Department of Homeland Security and other federal police agencies. They are not, as Senator Paul misleadingly suggests, rounding up people at will. They are making arrests based on probable cause that laws enacted by Congress have been violated. Equally without merit is the complaint that uniformed federal agents are covering their names on their badges and that other federal agents are acting in an undercover capacity. It is a convention for uniformed police to display their names along with their badges and assigned numbers in normal peacetime conditions. But there is no constitutional right to have federal police identify themselves by name or even identify themselves as police. In circumstances where police are being targeted for assault and harassment, which includes being doxxed by radicals who use identifying information to threaten police and their families, it is perfectly reasonable to withhold the names of agents. Notwithstanding the political demagogues who would have us turn a blind eye to violent crime under the guise of honoring free expression, the Trump administration has the constitutional duty to uphold federal law. In Portland, federal agents are faithfully executing our nation's laws. This is Andrew McCarthy, Fox News, and former federal prosecutor.
You've been listening to the Fox News Rundown. Stay up to date by subscribing to this podcast at foxnewspodcasts.com. And for up-to-the-minute news, go to foxnews.com.
Love Fox News? Click the subscribe button to get more of the news and opinion you trust, and click the Fox News Rundown playlist for the latest episodes.